Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
and me, Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
Our featured guest this week is Josh Cook. Josh Cook is a bookseller and co-owner at Porter Square Books in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he has worked since 2004. He's also author of the critically acclaimed postmodern detective novel, An Exaggerated Murder, and his fiction, criticism, and poetry have appeared in numerous leading literary publications. He grew up in Lewiston, Maine, and lives in Somerville, Massachusetts. His latest book is The Art of Libromancy with Biblioasis Press. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And I've been geeking out about this book as we've been chatting. So which would be fair to say? You began the practice of bookselling by way of writing or writing by way of bookselling?
So it was bookselling by way of writing. I've wanted to be a writer since about I was 16 or so. I was an English major in college, did all like the creative writing classes. And then when I got out of college, I didn't want to go right into an MFA program. I wanted to try a few things out. So I was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, which means I essentially worked as it's like a Peace Corps style program, but it stays domestically with the United States. I did that for a couple of years. And then some family stuff moved me from Vermont to the Boston area. And I had no set career goals. And it occurred to me that a bookstore might be a good place for a writer to work. So I applied to a couple of different places. I ended up just coincidentally living relatively close to Porter Square Books. And so they had a big neighborhood bookstore coming soon sign. And so I made sure to walk by every day until they put up the help wanted sign. They did. I applied and kind of here we are.
What kind of writing was it that started you down that road?
Back in high school, I was reading a lot of fantasy and so the Dragonlance series. I was also reading a lot of Kurt Vonnegut, that kind of very, 15, 16-year-old white guy kind of stuff. I was reading a lot of comic books. So I did kind of some work based off of that. I wrote some short stories. I wrote some very sappy, schlocky, disgusting love poetry to girls I thought were cute. And then kind of as I went to college, as I read more broadly, I kind of branched out and moved more towards what we would consider literary writing, and just kind of wrote what felt natural until a project stuck. And I played around with lots of different things. I've written like one horror short story. I've written a short story that's structured around a haiku. Played around a bunch of different things. And then the kind of postmodern detective story ended up being the one that stuck for me for the first go around. And kind of through all that, I've also done political writing. I had a column in my college newspaper for a while, which I also worked in some humor writing. So I was always doing some essaying. I've written book reviews. I wrote a blog for a long time that wrote about books and politics and sports and food. And so it was always a very kind of broad and varied journey. And then some things would stick and they'd eventually maybe get published or I'd at least finish them. And some things would just kind of drop away as they do until Melville House published An Exaggerated Murder.
So you've been bookselling for quite some time now, and we all know that has pretty crazy hours. How do you balance the bookselling and the writing? How do you carve out time for the writing?
So I've always worked second shift at Porter Square Books. So my shifts have started either 2 or 3 and then gone till 9:30, which means that I was able to sleep in a bit for most of this time. So I could get home when I got home, have some dinner. My partner who worked regular kind of office hours would go to bed, and then I usually stay up till about 2 or so reading and writing. And I would also work in the mornings beforehand. So it really was the perfect schedule for that. And, my household life, none of us have been particularly keen on, say, this perfectly spotless house or, some of the other things, kind of space management things that other people find really important that tend to take up time. So that was really never a challenge until the pandemic, when kind of my role with the website and my role as an experienced bookseller, my role as a co-owner, those hours went crazy. And then, of course, that balance is a new challenge, as I have a 5-month-old who quite gloriously takes up a lot of time as well. So we'll see what that looks like. I'm actually on my parental leave now. We'll see what that looks like when I go back. I expect to get no writing done, I think, is my goal. So as long as it's not 0, I'll be really happy with that for the foreseeable future.
Was there a specific organizational approach that you took to writing this book? For example, one essay was previously published as a chapbook, but did you continue to write this book essay by essay, or did you have many notes that shook out into the themes of each essay?
So some of these ideas were kicking around for a long time. There are a couple of pieces that actually appeared on that blog that I mentioned that I kind of drew from and kind of really worked from kind of blog quality up to actual book essay quality. But the kind of birth was the chapbook, the original chapbook, The Least We Can Do, which I'll read a little bit from when we get to that, because that gives a good kind of genesis story for this. And then I had worked with Biblioasis a couple of times for events that they did, including a launch of Jorge Carrion's essay collection, which started as a chapbook that then they had expanded. And that kind of being a part of that made me realize I could do this with all this kind of mess that was picking around in my head about Donald Trump and the Republican Party and what the conservative party has become in the United States and what publishing relates to that. And then kind of once Biblioasis was on board with the chapbook and then the essay collection, then I kind of moved forward looking through kind of older pieces, as well as really trying to put down into work, really trying to interrogate and put down into words my thoughts about bookselling over the almost 2 decades now that I've done it. Both kind of long-term, my experiences, as well as some of the issues that have arisen in the last few years.
And you did extensive research for this piece, and you bring in stories of writers, bookseller discussions, and other texts here. Why was it important to you to incorporate these examples?
I think that more grew out of being a reader. I mean, that's what a reader's life is. A reader's life is pulling text and information from the world and making it a part of your life and kind of growing into your life through that. Some of the pieces, so for example, Bookselling in the Real World, that was inspired directly by Matthew Salisi's Craft in the Real World. So that was, and kind of once I saw the ideas from that, I needed to kind of go out and, make sure what I was thinking about wasn't, total nonsense, that it was the trends that seemed to be correct, at least had some rational bearing in the real world. And, when something is as important to you as bookselling is to me, and I'm sure books are to all of you, you think about it all the time. And as you interact with it, you collect these ideas. So a lot of it was stuff that I had been reading or had been thinking about for a long time. And then other things were, so for a good example of this is the Indie Brand Paradox essay, in which I talk about how people make a lot of assumptions about independent bookstores because of how the term indie bookstore is branded. That started as a blog post about kind of one specific area, but as I saw other things go, like the kind of controversy around how the Strand used its payroll protection program funds and some of the other things there, I kind of opened up that essay to include that as well. So I would 100% say there are people who are much better researchers and much more thorough researchers than I am. And I'm sure, and I hope none of those people are book reviewers who really go after this one, but it's just my life as a reader and my life as someone who cares about this industry made it kind of natural for me to find other voices, find other stories, and make sure they're a part of what I am thinking and saying.
And certainly your on-the-ground experience is very important as well. I would think that is a very important part of research. So in the book, you also touch on the political and cultural influences of some writing schools and maybe some literary journals like the Paris Review. How do you think the rise of MFA programs, Masters of Fine Arts programs, have influenced contemporary writing and bookselling?
That's a good question. And there are, I feel like someone came out with a book a couple of years ago that really looked at, maybe it was something called, or there was MFA versus NYC kind of discussion that really looked at that. And when I just graduated from college and I was thinking about what I wanted to do, one of the reasons why I did not pursue an MFA is because, MFAs are for people with already have undergraduate degrees, and our society makes it much easier for certain populations, specifically people like me, to get undergraduate degrees. So there was already this, regardless of the politics the specific programs might be, there was already this unnatural barrier between a writer and their potential audience just kind of built into it. So I was hoping to kind of go around that. That's probably, and the kind of other thing I think that is important to my thinking about MFAs is there are so many talented writers in the world that there isn't a way to organize any aspect of publishing that doesn't result in amazing books coming out. And so the question is, can we organize it in a way that, promotes justice, that in a way that promotes equity, in a way that make sure that as many voices as are writing are being published and being read. I think Matthew Salisi's Craft in the Real World is a much better and more thorough explanation of how the particular way that MFAs developed in the United States specifically gave preference to certain types of stories and certain types of voices. And I think we've seen that for decades. We all know the short stories that we've read in college or have read in high school. And I'm not saying they're bad short stories. I love John Cheever. I love some of Ernest Hemingway's work. I love those kind of standards. But I think we're finally starting to see an understanding of the artificiality of that, and are starting to see in publishing, in bookselling, hopefully also in writing pedagogy, efforts to kind of remove that artificial barrier. And so we can start seeing the real multiplicity of voices. So voices that don't fit that, voices that have different understandings of what voice is, narrative structures that have different understandings of, say, what coincidence means and what closure is. We've got a long way to go. But what I have seen, especially in the last year and a half, 2 years in bookselling itself, and how committed booksellers have become to trying to break out of that and to raise various voices, I think it's exciting, and I hope it will continue, and we'll start to really move towards a publishing industry that is actually reflective of the human world.
Many of us will geek out over the very effective insight into the rough and tumble world of bookselling, which, as all sensible advice would tell us, is not a profession to go into to get rich or to solve the world's problems. Why was it important to share this microcosm of contemporary culture?
So I think if you kind of look at the state of the world, especially coming from kind of like an American perspective, where we were able to elect Donald Trump president and might again. And we have this kind of no longer future, but existing climate catastrophe that we're dealing with, and, kind of everything else. I don't think there is an industry in the world that wouldn't benefit from this type of interrogation led by someone who is experienced in it. Someone could write this for brewing. Someone could write this for, designing clothes. Someone could write this for banking, I guess. I'm not holding out a lot of hope that someone would, but someone certainly could. And one thing that I have at least seen in the reading that I've done is sometimes a hyper focus makes it easier to see bigger things. Like if you try and write about a book about how to fix contemporary American capitalism, that's going to be a tough book to write for. That's a tough book to write for like Thomas Piketty and David Graeber. And that's a tough book to write for a whole host of reasons. But a focus book about independent bookselling is able to look at, or is able to provide a lens for, and a kind of a slice of life for, that allows us to grapple with those, and to maybe grapple with those in productive ways. To your point about bookselling is never going to be an industry where someone can get rich. That certainly is true, but it is also true that it is an industry in which someone should be able to make a living. And if other industries made different decisions, that would be much easier for everyone in bookselling to make a living. And so my hope is that this microcosm is interesting in and of itself, interesting for people who love books and like know their booksellers by name and are always a little curious about what the booksellers stop talking about as soon as they arrive at the counter, but also to be interesting to people who are wondering how we could move to a better place. What could commerce look like in 5-10 years? And how could the questions that I ask apply to them and their vocation in their industry?
So in your heart of hearts, what do you hope most that people will do with this information after they set the book down and tell their friends at a cocktail party, this was really interesting? What do you hope that they do with the information?
Yeah. So I think that is it. If there's that, they go and examine I have a couple different levels. I hope obviously that booksellers continue the conversations that are a part of this, that this really becomes fuel and material for a lot of the change that's already happening within the industry, that, at Winter Institutes or at the regional trade shows, in the hallway after a panel, someone will say, oh, this panel reminded me of that essay that Josh wrote about. Did you read that? Oh, I did. What do you think about it? How does this apply to your store? What did he get wrong? What can we do better than what he thinks about? At a more general level, I hope that it inspires readers to be more conscientious about publishing in the books industry and to think about how their purchases impact the world at large, not just kind of their own little bookstore and their own little lives, but not little lives, but their own lives, but how it impacts publishing as a whole. And from that, how it impacts politics and policymaking. And then the kind of last level is people who maybe aren't necessarily as connected to reading, but might be connected to something else. And my book could potentially provide, if not a structure, then an example of a type of kind of close reading, a generous but critical examination that they could then apply to their business or something else that they love in their lives.
In the essay, Teammates in the Game of Books, you suggest that writers should spend time working in book retail. Of course, many self-published writers are involved with the retail of their own books. But what is it about this advice that you feel is important for the development of, yes, self-published and corporately published writers?
So what you can't see from sales reports is that last moment when the reader makes the decision. And you can't see what things like display space, design in bookstores have an impact on your sales. One of the kind of freeing things about being a bookseller who was also a writer is, I knew going into the publication of my book that there was very little I could do to really influence the sales. That once I had written the book, that was out in the world. And I wrote the best book I could and tried to be a person people wanted to support, and then just had to let go. And if sales happened, awesome. If not, understand there's a lot of different things that involved in a book sale besides the quality of the book. I think that is kind of at a mental health level, probably the best, but it really is important. I mean, it's why brewers sometimes want to be pouring the beers in their tap rooms. You want to get that direct connection with the people who are potentially consuming what you have created. And, there is something in that moment where a reader chooses a book. And if you don't see that, it's hard to kind of understand the complexity and beauty of how that happens. And, it shouldn't influence what you write necessarily. That should be, your own vision and your work with your editors and everything. But it gives you a connection to that kind of commerce side of your project that you wouldn't have anywhere else. And it'll also, help you give constructive feedback when they send back your potential cover design. It has die cuts and you're like, no, don't put die cuts on it, it'll be damaged. Or that kind of like off-white that we get at the bookstore. We're like, is this the right color or is this dirty? I don't know. We don't know what to do with it. So there's a real emotional level, then there's some kind of nitty-gritty practical things, but it really is just about connecting with the people you are trying to connect with in the most direct way possible.
So we just lived through the pandemic, as you touched on earlier, that changed a big aha moment for all of us. What kind of lessons do you think that booksellers and authors and readers have learned from living and working through that experience that will help us all in the future?
I think for readers, I think the biggest lesson was how important it is to be able to get out of the house and how wonderful a place to get out of the house to a bookstore can be. You know, the thing that could not be replaced by Zoom, by Netflix, by, you know, those kind of party game apps that let you kind of get together with your friends, is that kind of semi-public community where you're just a bunch of strangers, but you're joined in one space by the store. And I think a lot of stores have been those stores that have survived, which many of them did, probably a lot more than most of us expected, are doing really well because, you know, people learned what they were missing when they could not go to their local bookstore. And I think for booksellers, we kind of already knew how important community is. The idea of community is to independent bookstores. You know, we charge more for our books than Amazon does, so we always have to make a case for the value added, and that value added is community. It is one thing to kind of vaguely know that is important. It's another thing to see it demonstrated so starkly and so dramatically by the pandemic and by the kind of resurgence of shopping that's happened afterwards. People want what we have. People want both the personal connections they can make with conversations with booksellers, but they also want to just kind of be in public spaces and just like notice what that person is looking at, but they're not going to talk to them. It's just like you get to value being a human being in the world. In terms of practicality, in terms of kind of practical lessons, I think the kind of pandemic and the aftermath of the pandemic should hopefully make booksellers more ambitious. I think there are more readers we can reach. I think there are more sales we can make. I think there are creative ways to give people the community that they want, that they need, that's not exploitative, but still helps make this a business where people can survive on the wages.
So, have you had time to work on any new writing lately? And if so, what are you working on?
So I've always been, as I said from the beginning, I've always been kind of very much a broad, I've been a side projects kind of person. So I've always got like, I never have a main project. I've got like 5 side projects, and eventually one of those kind of works out and becomes the thing. So I've got a couple novels that are my current major side projects. Neither one is anywhere close to being talked about or published or anything like that. I think kind of my career plan now is to support Art of Libromancy, see how it goes, see if this is something that readers want more of or not, and then see what energy I have in 6 or 7 months and see how those side projects have gone and kind of go from there.
When I was first learning to be a sales rep after being a bookseller, my sales director told me a great way to get to know a bookseller or a book buyer, or both, and to discover new writing was to go into the store and ask a bookseller, what should I be reading right now? And so after reading The Art of Libromancy, what should we be reading right now, do you think?
Oh, so I'll do a couple just to kind of get a range. In theory, this is my job, so I should be good at this. $2 Radio, a small publisher out of, I think, Columbus, Ohio, has a book coming out in September, I think September 12th, called Landscapes by Christina Lee, L.I., I believe. It might be the best book about climate change that I've read. The best nonfiction, best novel about climate change. It is set kind of in a approachable future, mostly at an English manor that has become dilapidated over the years and is set to be torn down. It's also about Turner's work, the painter, the British painter Turner. There's a complicated love trial. It's a lot about how we catalog and how we use the functions of archiving and librarying to understand our world, even as it is fading. And it's just a very quiet book, despite the fact that there are surrounding it very clearly these massive catastrophes. Like, I'm pretty sure London was flooded, killing many, many people. As in some part of this book, there's clearly a massive amount of climate refugees in the book. But one of the things that is easy to forget is that catastrophes are also quiet. Like, yeah, you've had to deal with all this disastrous stuff and fires and floods and stuff, but you've also, like, you haven't been able to knit for 6 weeks because all your knitting needles are gone. You know, these quiet things as well. And Landscapes does an amazing job of capturing that quietness without diminishing it and without romanticizing it and without forgetting the kind of bigger things. If there are any mystery fans, the Pushkin Press has been publishing this Japanese author, Seishi Yokomizo, who is essentially the Japanese Agatha Christie or Arthur Conan Doyle. The first that they published was called The Hanjin Murders. I just finished reading the most recent one, The Devil's Flute Murders. And I think they're great mysteries. But they're also really great introductions for people who are looking to get into translated literature, because Yokomizo was a huge fan of Christie and Dorothy Sayers and Arthur Conan Doyle. And so the structures of the mysteries are very familiar to Western audiences. Like, anyone who has read a classic British locked room mystery will recognize the plot of the Hanjin Murders. But he roots them very firmly in Japanese post-war culture. So you are exposed to different ways of thinking, different ways of understanding family and honor, that kind of the kind of real value of translated literature, and kind of doing what you can to kind of reach across your own assumptions, but in a way that you are still have these safe fallbacks. You know, when you get the kind of explanation for the murder, it will be very satisfying and very familiar if you are already familiar with the Western detective tradition. So I think both of those would be great.
So we'd love to hear some of your book, if you would mind. Would you care to read for us a little bit?
I will. So I'm going to read a couple passages from a couple different parts of the book. And so the first passage is from the chapbook, The Least We Can Do, White Supremacy, Free Speech, and Independent Bookstores. And I think it gives a good example of how this was born. This is kind of where the seed for this book came from. And then I'm going to read a short passage from the first essay, A Reader's Introduction to Bookselling, maybe give a better sense of what this book is now. So we're going to do what it started and where it ended. And this is the first time I've read this section in public. So fingers crossed I do a good job. And thank you for the opportunity. So this is from the section called Apology. When Sean Spicer was given prime billing at Book Expo America and Milo Yiannopoulos tried to publish a book with Simon & Schuster, I churned out 40 pages of text about free speech, white supremacy, and independent bookstores over the next several months, returning to that text now and then as a salve or outlet for my frustration. And then I just let it sit. I should have written something even earlier, after I had been in bookselling for 10 years and watched Republicans and conservatives profiting in terms of money and power off the racist backlash to the Obama administration. Someone should have written something even earlier as we watched the Bush administration start two endless wars, institute torture as an official American practice, and completely remake American society after the trauma of 9/11. Someone should have written something when Rush Limbaugh's first book was published, before the reactionary racism of right-wing talk shows became fully mainstream. Like so many white liberal Americans, I thought the gains made during the civil rights movement were secure, and that even if there was still a long way to go towards true social and racial justice, at least we weren't sliding back. It's embarrassing. Only the thinnest veils were thrown over the racism of the war on drugs, criminal justice reform, and welfare reform. Even after the Tea Party rose to power almost entirely through the white grievance and racism stoked by Fox News. Even after the Republican Party formally embraced this radical version of themselves. I did not see a resurgent threat, and I did not see my complicity in that resurgence. Donald Trump was president, in part, because the media, publishers, bookstores, book reviewers, readers, and everyone with power and influence in books decided it was okay to sell books by Rush Limbaugh, Bill O'Reilly, Ann Coulter, Tucker Carlson, and all the other right-wing pundits and politicians, monetizing and legitimizing the white supremacist ideas they expressed and providing a platform for those ideas to reach more people. Donald Trump was president because we did not take responsibility for our own decisions. Donald Trump was president because we did nothing when con artists monetized white grievance, white fear, and white supremacist ideas. Most of us took some of that money. Some of us took a lot of that money. Donald Trump was president because the conservative movement over the last 30 years broke our political media's bullshit detector. Donald Trump was president because people like Newt Gingrich, Paul Ryan, Mike Pence, Ted Cruz, and, well, Donald Trump himself were taken seriously, as if they were honestly participating in American political discourse. Donald Trump was president because publishers and bookstores showed readers that we believed those people and ideas deserve to be taken seriously. Whatever we do going forward, we can no longer pretend that we are innocent. Donald Trump put children in cages. We can no longer act as though book sales do not have ethical and moral components. Donald Trump sabotaged the national response to COVID-19, killing hundreds of thousands of people. We cannot pretend that it does not matter who we help make money. A Confederate flag was waved in the Capitol building during a violent insurrection that killed 6 people. We cannot pretend that we don't have some responsibility over what ideas are discussed in public discourse. I apologize for waiting this long to take this small step within my industry. I apologize for not listening to what many, many people had tried to tell me and all of white America about the threat to our country. I apologize for prioritizing avoiding interpersonal conflicts with friends, family, and colleagues over confronting a persistent and deadly threat. I don't know if what I have written here will make a big difference. I don't know if independent bookstores have enough power to make a big difference in the fight against white supremacy, other supremacist ideologies, and fascism in America. But we have some power. And if we don't fight, we can't win. So that very kind of specific motivation was the seed for this. But as I wrote the essays, as I worked with my editors, as I looked at my industry more, it grew to something more general. And so I'm going to read a couple short passages from a reader's introduction to bookselling to give you a sense of what this now is from that seed. If books are important to you because you're a reader or a writer, then how books are sold should be important to you as well. If it matters to you that your vegetables are organic, your clothes are made without child labor, your beer brewed without a culture of misogyny, then it should matter how books are made and sold to you. This collection isn't the jungle for bookselling, and I don't spend that much time on how the sausage gets made, but I do pull back the curtain a bit on these spaces that are so important to readers and writers. For readers, you'll be able to see some of the discussions and decisions that create these spaces in your communities, as well as some of the debates over how those spaces should be created and maintained. You'll also learn some of the challenges bookstores face in terms of meeting their individual missions, staying open as individual stores, and staying important and sustainable as an industry. Furthermore, by seeing how stores communicate with readers through the use of space, stock, events, social media, and via personal conversations, and by learning some of the ideas and terms that dictate and organize our efforts, you'll be a better bookstore customer. It will be easier for you to find what you're looking for. You'll ask better questions and get better answers. You'll be more able to support your local store without having to spend any extra money. For writers, I think it is important to your careers to have a better understanding of that last link in the chain that brings books from your brains to readers. I hope this conversation will be enlightening, or at least interesting, to everyone, like sneaking out of a brewery tour and eavesdropping on the actual brewers chatting about their latest batch, or taking a wrong turn in the museum and overhearing the curators discussing their next exhibit. Reading this book won't teach you everything you need to know to become a successful bookseller, because that's not the goal of the book. And I don't know everything there is to know about being a successful bookseller. And there is no one way to be a successful bookseller. Furthermore, what it means to be a bookstore and how to succeed at being a bookstore has changed many times over the years and will likely change again in the near future. Many of my ideas could be out of date in the next few years, but armed with them now, you can at least dip your toe in the conversation. And the next time you walk into a bookstore, you'll have a better understanding of everything that goes on behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you. You've given us a lot to think about. Our guest today has been Josh Cook, author of The Art of Libromancy, published by Biblioasis Press. Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.